Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined today by Matt Jones of WholeHogSports.com, a friend of the show for since the launch of the show. So happy to have him back on to talk about the Razorbacks. We will get into all of that, plenty of stuff to talk about with Arkansas so far this season. But first, I have to remind you that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover are brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1 hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. Matt, first off, appreciate you joining us again today as you have the last couple of years.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Let's jump into, I think, that was the burning question in the lead up to the season that now I seems like it's been answered in the affirmative, but you can tell us a little bit about it. Tell us about why this lineup has been so much more effective this season so far versus the perception of what it was the past couple of seasons.
Well, I think there's a lot of things. Number one, I think it begins with Aloy, who is Arkansas's DH, who, if you would have asked the coaches in January, I think they would have said that he would get on the field to hit against left-handers and they would platoon their DHs. And he's made it to where they can't take him out of the lineup. He's hitting right-handers, I think, better than he's hitting left-handers this year. He's been great with runners in scoring position. I would say another key to the lineup has been Charles Davelin at the top. I mean, he's hitting close to 600 this month. Think about what that does for your lineup when your leadoff guy is hitting like that. He's been great, really setting the table for him. Aloy, there's not as big of a hole in his swing this year. The slider was something where he just couldn't lay off of it last year. And, he's been really good for him. Brent Iredale's not hitting real well in SEC play, but then you look up last week and he has 5 RBI in a game, including a grand slam whenever they pitched around Aloy in front of him. So, and that's just kind of scratching the surface. Against South Carolina last week, the bottom third of their order went 14 for 34 and had 9 RBI. And, when you're getting that kind of production really across the board, and especially from the bottom of your lineup, it allows for a player like Iredale to struggle a little bit. And, they've been really good. I've been really impressed with them. I thought they were going to be good. And I think they've hit the ball so well, Joe, that, the thought coming into this season was that Arkansas was going to be a real aggressive team on the bases. And they haven't had to be, because there's just been so many doubles and home runs. And they're moving the runners as opposed to maybe having to manufacture some runs. And it's been really something to watch. When they, even at Ole Miss, they scored 30 runs over 3 days. But when they get into this home ballpark here at Baum, it really hasn't mattered the opponent. They have hit the cover off the baseball. I think they've run rolled something like 9 teams at home this year. And, they're scoring double-digit runs, it feels like, just about every game. Even the other night against Missouri State, they scored 13. They lost the game. They scored 13 runs and had 16 hits. And it's one of the best lineups that I've seen come through here in a long time.
Yeah, it is quite the change of, losing games that, you feel like Arkansas maybe should win by we just didn't have enough pitching to get it done versus the alternative, which just felt like, the pitching's been great, but the offense is stuck in neutral. To what extent do you get the sense that Dave and Nate Thompson have maybe been pleasantly surprised by some of this? Or do you get the sense that they kind of thought that maybe this is what they would be?
I think they thought they would score quite a bit this year, or that they would score more than they did last year. I think what has surprised them is that they haven't had to manufacture runs the way that they thought they were. I mean, back in the fall, they were, they would start practices, and maybe to give you a little bit of a glimpse into how they run fall baseball here, they practice, but it's a lot of scrimmaging, and that's how it's been in the past. And last year, they would start practices with base running drills and, going first, things like going first to third, dirt ball reads, stolen bases. And, they thought that was going to be the type of team that they had this year. And I think they've got that kind of capability if they get into a game where they've got to manufacture some runs. But I think I think the power, and in particular the power from Cahill at DH, has probably been a little bit of a surprise to him. I know that DH has got to be a surprise. There was thought before the season that they would maybe have multiple designated hitters, and pretty much since the first weekend they haven't been able to take Aloy out of the lineup. At one point in time, he was hitting 565. Now that he's come back down to earth, it's 400 something now, but we're deep enough into a season that it's a true 400 average. And even against SEC teams, I think he's hitting in the high 300s. So, uh, that was one of the questions for me was, can he keep this up against SEC pitching? Knowing full well he wasn't going to be able to keep it up at the level he was going, at one point in time. But yeah, he's been able to hit pretty well against him.
It's such a Kuhio is such an interesting story too, because I heard from someone over the summer after he'd committed to Arkansas that it's an interesting backstory where at BYU it was like he was a two-way guy, but then and they were planning to pitch him, and then like kind of last minute they were like, actually, we'd like you to be in the lineup, and he just didn't have the normal lead up. So I have to imagine, and maybe this has been discussed, maybe it hasn't. I have to imagine some of him just being this instant superstar is that he prepared to be a hitter all off season and had a full off season in front of him and kind of knew the expectation of, hey, you're gonna be in the lineup regularly and we want you to hit.
Yeah, I think there's probably something to that. I think that they want him to be an outfielder at some point in time. They're not ready for that, and I don't think he's ready for that yet to be an outfielder. But what I really think is happening here, Joe, is that he and Vahiva both have been so good in the middle of the order. And sometimes 2 and 3 positions. Vahiva's pretty much manned that 2 position all year. Vahiva's kind of bounced back and forth between 3, 4, and 5. But they've been so good in that order. I think that they're so far from home that there's a comfort level being here with their brother. You know what I mean? And it's helped bring the best out of both of them. And there's probably a little bit of a friendly rivalry that's going, a little brotherly love between the two of them. That's hey, let's see if I can outdo this guy on this day. And it's healthy. The first, and you notice that Kuhio hits a home run, the first one out there out of the dugout's Vahiva, or vice versa. And I just think they're really bringing the best out of each other. You got Nolan Souza here from the islands as well. It's a neat deal at the ballpark right now. Just kind of that Hawaiian love, if you will, that you see, because the Aloys and even Nolan Souza's played better here over the last few weeks. He had a pop up the other night that he dropped against Missouri State that very well may have cost him the win. But for the most part, he's been playing pretty well over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I saw the graphic on one of the games over the weekend, or maybe it was 2 weekends ago, with Arkansas that, they've had 4 Hawaiians in their history and 3 of them are on the roster now, and like Rick
Yeah.
Nomura being the other.
Well, and Rick Nomura is the reason that Nolan Souza's here in the first place. Rick is a coach back in Honolulu now, coaches a team. I think they're called the Hawaii Tigers, a travel team, and it's hard for those kids out on the islands to get exposed to recruiters. It's expensive for them to come over here to showcase events, and it's expensive for the coaches to go over there and recruit. And so, like in Kuhio's instance, I think he got to BYU based on social media, based on putting some clips on social media, and they saw him. And I think people saw that, what his brother had done at Sacramento State, that probably helped a little bit. His dad had a baseball background. He played for Hawaii. But yeah, it's really interesting. And they got another Hawaiian coming up through the pipeline. They've got one committed. I think it's in this year's it's either in this year's senior class or junior class. I'm not sure which one. Maybe this year's junior class, but a big 6'4" outfielder who looks like he can hit the cover off the ball too.
And it's working so well. Why not just go back to that well if you're Dave and the staff? And it's interesting. The Hawaiian baseball culture too is such that I remember talking to Maui Ahuna, who played at Tennessee, but he spent his first couple of years at Kansas, and Kansas kind of famously recruited the islands because they had a connection. One of their staffers was, from Hawaii, and he would go back over there. Anyway, regardless, the point is that I remember Maui telling me that, and Kansas coach Rich Price telling me that, their baseball culture on the islands is so insular. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just, to your point, they're so isolated that when you get a reputation for, hey, it's a really good experience to go to school here, like they take care of you, they have this, that, and the other, and they win a bunch of games, like it can really be a true pipeline. Just because there's so much trust in that baseball community on the islands.
Yeah, I think so. I was talking to ORU's coach Ryan Fulmar a couple of weeks ago. Their top 2 hitters are Hawaiians, or at least they were at the point or the time that they came over to Fayetteville. And he said, how interesting is it that you don't get a whole lot of Hawaiians playing D1 college baseball, and here we have 5 of them in Northwest Arkansas in the starting lineup on one night.
Yeah, that's crazy. Last thing on the offense before we pivot to talking about the mound a little bit. If you'd have told me, I said this on one of the podcasts with Mark the other day, that if you'd have told me that Kendall Diggs is hitting under 200, Nolan Sousa is hitting whatever it is now 229 or
Mhm.
so, and Ryder Helfrich's been fine, but not transcendent like we thought after his summer he might have been. Like I kind of would have thought, oh boy, it may not be going well, and yet here we are. Those three guys in particular, though, you mentioned Souza swinging the bat better. Helfrich, I think, much the same. Is this kind of just a deal where it's going to come around for some of those guys, and we just kind of have to be patient with it? Where are we at in terms of those guys that were thought of to kind of be the core of what this was going to be?
I'm not sure about Diggs. He played a couple of nights ago against Missouri State, and it just did not go well for him at all. He came up the first at bat, and batter in front of him had walked to lead off an inning, and Kendall hit into a 6-4-3 double play. Next at bat, bases loaded, nobody out, and he pops up to the infield, can't advance a runner from third, and then he was pulled after a play in the field where he probably should have hit a cutoff man from right field, tried to make a spectacular throw from right to third, and it ends up being an error, and it allows Missouri State to score a run. And you look at a game that ends up 14-13 in 10 innings. It was a big play in the game. I don't, he had shoulder surgery last summer. I don't know where he is in terms of he's obviously healthy enough to play, but is he back to where he was pre-shoulder surgery? I don't know. It certainly doesn't look like it. It just looks like he's really struggling to find his way. On Souza, you mentioned 229. That was down at 045 at one point. So, he's raised that up quite a bit. The other night against Missouri State, he had a 3-hit game. He's got multiple home runs this season. He hits the ball really hard when he makes contact. The problem is that there's a lot of swing and miss there. And, inside off speed pitches really seem to fool him, inside sliders. You even saw it with Missouri State the other night. They set him up on I think it was an 0-2 pitch, so a pitch outside, and you knew they were going to come right back inside with something off speed, and they did, and he couldn't lay off of it. That's going to happen sometimes. It's just, I think it probably needs to happen a little bit less with him. But to his credit, again, he was a 0.45 hitter after a couple 3 weeks into the season, and he started to pick it back up. And he's not. It's not a hole in the lineup anymore when he comes to the plate necessarily. He's making contact. He's he's drawing walks a little bit. And whenever he gets onto the bases, he's a good base runner. And then on Helfrich, I was talking to Nate Thompson earlier this week about the offense, and we were really talking about Charles Davalon and what he's done to change the dynamic at the top of the lineup. And he said, "Hey, I want to say this too. Ryder Helfrich is really coming on for us. If you look over the last 4 games, Helfrich is 8 for 15, and he had
Mm.
never had a multi-hit game until last Tuesday, and he's got 3 now in his career, and that kind of tells you what's going on with him. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about what's going on at the bottom of the lineup with Souza and Helfrich and Justin Thomas. It seems like all 3 of them are starting to figure it out. Thomas told Bubba Carpenter, who's Arkansas's radio analyst, he said they call themselves a caboose gang, and he said the caboose. He said the caboose gang, they don't want to get they don't want to be a hole in the lineup, and at least after the South Carolina series, it doesn't look like they're a hole anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fun. Embrace your role. Be a
Mhm.
superstar in your role, as they say. We're gonna flip to the mound here in just a second. First, I have to give a shout out to one of our other sponsors, Tecovas Boots. Whether it's the leather in your glove or your tailgating chairs, baseball people know that quality matters. That's why we love Tecovas Boots. Born in Texas, just like yours truly, handcrafted with over 200 meticulous steps and comfortable from day one, they're perfect for wherever the college baseball season takes you. From road trips to rivalry games, post-game celebrations, or just everyday wear, Tecovas boots are made to go the distance. Find your perfect pair today at Tecovas. Let's start on Gabe Gaeckle, Matt. Has it been as rough for him as the ERA suggests, 6 and change, whatever it is, or is that ERA a little bit deceptive, somewhere in between? Tell me a little bit about that.
I think the whip tells the story more with him. The whip is about 146 right now. He is walking batters at a higher rate than I've ever seen from him. And granted, he's a sophomore. He was a closer last year, and he's pitching in a different role. But he's walking batters, and I think that's what's hurting him. Um, last week against South Carolina, 1 2/3 innings, walked 3 batters in those 1 2/3 innings, and he came back out to the mound in the second inning of that game with an 8-0 lead, and you think, okay, he's going to be able to cruise and get them to fifth, sixth inning in this game. And South Carolina, they just they laid off some pitches, they got a couple of big hits, and all of a sudden they had to go make that a bullpen game. And the ERA, it's really inflated based on two bad innings in one game against it was Charlotte on February 28th. Charlotte scored, I think, 10 runs against him over the course, or maybe 9 runs over the course of 2 innings. There was a 5-run first, and I think there was a 4-run third or fourth inning, and that'll balloon anybody's ERA. And then he just hasn't been able to have any length to bring that ERA back down. Even against Ole Miss, he had a rough first inning. He was able to mitigate the damage a little bit, and I think hold him to 2 runs. And he pitched really well the second, third, and the fourth innings. But when you throw 30-something pitches your first inning, you're not going to be able to make it very deep into a ball game. And he's had 3 starts this year where he hasn't made it past the fourth inning. I think that's what's really been the surprise, because I thought, and I think a lot of people around here thought that he would give them some length in that starting role. And it just really hasn't happened this year. Even the game against Portland, whenever he had probably his best outing of the year, I think he went 5 1/3. They weren't going to bring him out for that last batter, I don't think, based on talking to the pitching coach. But the inning before had gone so quickly that they didn't have time to get somebody warmed up. So it just worked out that they sent him back out to get one more out. And he got a nice ovation because it came on the heels of that rough outing that he had. But yeah, it's been a really rough year for him. The command has really been the issue. And, we'll see if he can figure it out this week against Vanderbilt. But I think he's got to figure it out, or they're going to have to make a change in the starting rotation. I just don't think you can keep throwing him out there and, him not getting past the third or fourth inning a lot of times.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to ask you. You kind of led me right there, where it's like, is a change maybe on the table at some point? It sounds like your answer is yes.
I think there's a chance. Yeah, I mean, if he doesn't pitch well against Vanderbilt this weekend, I would not be surprised at all if you see a change in the rotation when Missouri comes to town the next week. There are a lot of pitchers on this staff who I think have got the potential to start. Aiden Jimenez is here from Oregon State. He had Tommy John surgery last year. He was going to be the number 2 to Aiden May at Oregon State. And, that if you're a number 2 in Oregon State's rotation, I think it tells you a little bit about what that guy can do. And he's been really good in the outings that he's had here this season. Gage Wood, they're going to get him back at some point in time this year. He was pitching really well in a starter role before he got hurt against Michigan down in Arlington in the second weekend of the season. Colin Fisher is a left-hander who starts for him on the midweeks a lot of times. Now, I don't think that they would put Colin Fisher in the starting rotation with 2 other left-handers. I think, number one, you want to have, a little bit of a staggered look there with your weekend starters. And number 2, you got to have you need to have some left-handers in the back end to be able to pitch on the weekends too. So I'd be surprised if they put him in there, but they've got some options as far as starting pitching goes.
A couple of quick things, and we'll get you out of here. I know we've got a little bit of a time constraint here, but who on the mound has opened some eyes, do you think? I mean, I look at a guy like Parker Coyle, who's always had pretty good stuff. He was good on the Cape, but in the spring season, it just never quite, he never quite found a niche. Now it feels like maybe he has. So whether it's him, somebody else you've talked about, Jimenez or whoever, who's opened eyes on the mound that you think has really been impactful?
3 pitchers jump out. Number 1, Jimenez. I think he's 7 1/3 innings in the SEC without allowing a run. He had a 3-inning save against Ole Miss, and then he gave them a really nice relief outing last week against South Carolina after Gaeckle went out of the game. The second one, Parker Coyle, who you mentioned, he had an immaculate inning earlier this year. And if there was going to be a pitcher who had an immaculate inning, I think it would be him, because he just throws strikes. I think that game where he had the immaculate inning, he threw 17 pitches and 14 of them were for strikes. And I mean, it's just, obviously it's not that high every time out of a strike percentage, but it's pretty close. I mean, he has become a real strike thrower. Arkansas has had some of these guys under Hobbs, whether it be a Jacob Kostichok back in 2019, I think, or there have been some others where it just didn't work out for them the first couple of years for whatever reason, or they just didn't reach their ceiling. And that third year, it's like the light came on, and it has really come on for Parker. He's more. I asked Matt earlier this year, Hobbs. I said, "Is he taller?" He said, "No, he's thicker." He's like, "That's why he looks bigger. He's thicker." And so he's been able to put on a little bit more weight, which is allowing him to hold his stuff later into, outings and obviously later into the season. So he's been really good for them out of the bullpen. I was looking at one of your competitors' draft rankings yesterday and noticing that he wasn't in the top 300. And I'm like, I'd have him in the top 300 because a left-hander who can pitch like that, I think that he's going to be somebody who a major league team takes on that second day, and uh, they're pleased that they did it. And then the other pitcher I would mention is Carson Wiggins. He's a freshman. He was not expected to get to campus. This is if you've been watching Arkansas baseball for very long, you might remember the name Jackson Wiggins a couple 3 years back, who ended up being a pretty high draft prospect. And I think he's now with the Cubs. This is his little brother, and if you look at him, you think you're looking at the same guy. In terms of they just look the same. I watched their high school basketball highlights, and you would think you were watching the same player. It's amazing. I talked to Blaine Kinsley, who was Arkansas's old strength coach, one time about Jackson, and I said, how did you? Or we were talking about how hard he throws, and he said, how you can tell somebody's going to throw hard is their jump metrics in the weight room. And he said, this guy has got jump metrics like we've never seen before. And Carson is kind of the same. And you watch him play basketball, and I mean, it's like a 10-minute dunk highlight video with the two of them. So I say all that to say that Carson Wiggins, he's got a ton of velocity. He's 99, 100 consistently. But what he has done, Joe, is that he's commanded this slider. And the slider looks like a fastball out of his hands. It's 85, 87, 84, somewhere in there. And teams just haven't been able to hit it. And it's really made a difference with him, because I think early this season it was a lot of fastballs, and now he can use that slider to fool people. He came in and he had a save within the last week or two. I can't remember exactly which game it was, but he threw, I think it was after Ole Miss. It was game 3 of Ole Miss, and he was facing their top hitter, Mormon. And he threw him 4 sliders, and 3 of them were for swings and misses. And it just shows you how good that pitch is. It's really elevated him. He's going to be a draft eligible sophomore next year, and I would not be surprised if he's taken maybe on the first day of the draft. He's that good.
Last thing for you, in just a couple of sentences, Matt. If there's something we can nitpick where this team can still improve, it is blank.
I think they've got to have better pitching. And that's been the surprise with them. Their defense is top. You're asking me for a couple of sentences. I'm a little bit long-winded, but their fielding's really good. They were tops nationally before they had a couple of errors the other night against Missouri State. They're in the top 10 nationally in just about every offensive category, and they're going to run into a pitching staff or two that's going to be able to shut them down. I don't doubt that, but they've got to have some pitching to be ready for those weekends that happens. I think they're getting consistent pitching out of some. They need to get about 2 or 3 more guys going on the mound where they can, where they're not having to win some of these slugfests.
It's like we've been saying, Matt, Arkansas, you can bank on them scoring a bunch of runs if they could only find pitchers. It's just kind of the opposite deal. Of course, I'm being sarcastic, kind of the opposite deal of what we said about that team in recent history. Thank you, Matt Jones, for joining me again this morning, and we'll see you down the road.
All right. Appreciate it, Joe. We'll see you.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra at D1Baseball.com. Thank you to our sponsors, Academy Sports and Outdoors and Tecovas Boots. Thank you once again to Matt Jones of WholeHogSports.com, and thank you, the listener, for listening.